Committee meeting to order. Board of Alders notice New Haven Legislation Committee with the Board of Alders will meet in person on Tuesday, May 7, 2024 at 6 p.m. in the Board of Alders chambers located at 5 Church Street, New Haven, Connecticut, to hear and act on the following items. LM 2023-0611 zoning map amendment of the City of New Haven, changing the zoning designation of 48 Grant Street, number 1, from IL Light Industrial to RM2 Residential, 48 Grant Street, number 1, map 273, block 0019, lot 01001, 2 OR-2023-0047, to amend the New Haven zoning ordinance text of section 22, accessory dwelling units, including removing the owner occupancy requirement, allowing detached and attached just outside of the existing building, and eliminating the minimum lot size requirement and amended setback requirements for ADIS. ADUs. 3, LM-2024-0272, order of the Board of Alders of the City of New Haven approving the request for an exception to the city charter requirement concerning electoral status for the Chief Administrative Officer, Gina Rush-Kittle. The order on the Vice Chair attest to Michael Smart, City Town Clerk. These items are on file and available in the office of the City Clerk located at 200 Orange Street, room 202, New Haven, Connecticut 06510 for recommendations to be spawned 203-946-7651B or 203-946-8582 TTY TBD. Public comment testimony may also be submitted via email to publictestimony@newhavencT.gov before 2 p.m. on the day of the meeting. The meeting may also be viewed on the New Haven Board of Alders YouTube page. Welcome, colleagues. Welcome those that have come. I'll ask the committee members to introduce themselves, please, starting from my left.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Carmen Rodriguez, Ward 6.
Adam Marchand, Ward 25.
Richard Furlow, Ward 27.
Eli Saban, Ward 7.
Great, thank you. And as she's coming, we'll note that Alder Evelyn Rodriguez from Ward 4, committee member, is joining us. Thank you. We will ask for the presenters of the first item to come forward. This is regarding 48 Grant Street. As they're coming, we'll give just a little bit of housekeeping. The microphones seem to be already placed where they should be placed at the appropriate angle. It would do well not to touch the base, but just to maneuver the arm. And men with strong voices, I know both of you, so we'll ask that you speak up, speak strong and clear into the microphone. And we'll start with your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, esteemed Alders.
Good evening, Mr. Chair and Alders. My name is Ken Smith, 145 Kennedy Avenue, New Haven, Connecticut.
Thank you and welcome. You have the floor, sir.
I'm here today to ask for a zoning change of said property on 48 Grant Street. The building itself, it's a condominium building with a collaboration with the city itself. Ground floor is the city, which is already a RM2 in the same building. But the difference in the designation of what can be done with the building, it's going to just kind of make the whole building designation as a RM2 so that it can be developed as housing for that particular area. The area, we always at that particular area and thought that the area would be good for additional housing. Again, we we understand that the city is also looking for additional housing. We want to contribute to that as well. And we really believe that this is the right zoning for that building, being that the building itself is already armed building.
Do you have anything to add?
Yes.
Alder?
Thank you. This property, 48 Grand Street, is at my ward that I represented. And a little history of this property back, part of it was used as a rehab and was zoned as an RM2 already. And the next part of it, which is industrial, which was used as a factory for some time, and it's, fulfilled its part of the needs. And Mr. Collins said, this would be a good time to change the zoning to the RM to zone for residential and so we could have some more housing unit, which we very much needed. So I'm asking to support the building change. Thank you.
Any questions from committee members? Okay, and how many apartments are you looking to build?
Initially, when we had it, it was going to, well, with the city, it was going to be 86. I think without the cities, it's down to like 60 units in the existing building.
Okay, do you have a general breakdown between?
Yeah, it was 60 plus would be 1 bedrooms. Initially, it was geared towards, not specifically for, but geared towards 50 and older. So we kind of give that opportunity. Understand that there's a lot of housing for families, but there's also I don't want to call us elders at 50. I still feel very much young, but they're downsizing, really doesn't have an area to go. So we feel that would be a good target market primarily. Also, was going to put a few 2 bedrooms in it, but the majority was geared towards 1 bedroom housing.
Thank you. I don't want to get too much into the project because that's not what we're talking about tonight. But I think it's good for the committee to understand why it's going from IL to RM2. So I appreciate that answer.
Absolutely appreciate it. Thank you.
Any other questions from committee members?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for your presentation. I see in the materials that there's an MBLU number for blocked in a block and lot 01041, right? Sometimes when I've seen map amendments, I've seen very exact surveyor level descriptions of the actual property to be rezoned. So I was just wondering if you had that done, or if you just going to go with this block number a lot for the actual piece of the city to be rezoned.
Well, we had a land survey done of the area. I guess we just kind of see what is accurate for the best that I can. Have to go with whatever it is.
Okay. And so you have that somewhere in your possession, you have that description of the surveyor of the actual meets and bounds of the
Absolutely.
area to be rezoned.
Yes.
Okay. That would be good to have in the materials, I would think. Just for completeness.
I wasn't sure if I needed to. I did make some copies of what it does do some meets and bounds. It does have some information that's in it. It's kind of basic information of basic.
I see floor plans and site plan related materials. Application, which was included in your packet.
Okay, so you have
Some other material, just if there is what I'm, which I don't see. I just think it's prudent to have the most complete documentation of the actual property or portion of property to be rezoned. So you want to get that from.
Of course, absolutely.
Okay. And so when you were looking at this property, did you think about any possibilities for redevelopment in the use table for industrial? I suspect not, but I'm just asking you to see what went through your mind about what are the possibilities for this property and why does it really need to be rezoned?
Okay, I was trying to understand the question. So I think, yeah, well, it has a number of different uses. I mean, on your side of it, we had to look at what that possibility could be. And it was, it had a number of different as a light industrial. You know, there's a lot more choices, if you will, as a light industrial than as residential. But we felt that residential would be the better choice and, you know, have a nicer impact, if you will, to that community.
Well, this bit of your property that's industrial, it would be adjacent to other areas nearby that are also industrial, correct? Or is it just like a island of industrial in the sea of residential?
If I may, thank you. This is the only industrial property that sits on Grant Street by itself, and the surrounding neighborhood are all residential property around there. So the prudent thing to do to make this into a residential. Only when that's
Well, that certainly makes sense to me. That's all I have now, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman Marsh. And did you have a request for information? Did you want it? Alderman.
I was mentioning that if the applicant has the more exact description of the property, needs and bounds, for example, or something, it would be good for us to have that for the record. So, through you, Mr. Chair.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes, I can get that to you.
Okay. That's great. She got that. Anyone else?
No.
I noticed that the city plan report, they give a favorable recommendation, city plan,
Mhm.
and they mentioned that this property they afford or affordable housing to that area. Is this the plan to build affordable housing out of this unit? I mentioned part of the city plan report.
Yeah, we definitely plan on doing some affordable housing in the area with continued development of the parcel that's there. Right? And there's an automatic component, if I'm not mistaken, that has affordable housing in the development of it already. So with the, you know, as we try to expand it and work within that particular community, of course, there's going to be a lot more affordable housing.
Great. Any further questions? Alderman Rodriguez.
To the why this request had not been made before, since it was a rehabilitation center and individuals were living in this building? Thank you.
Yeah, that goes back to a long story, if you already know. I mean, I have been trying to convert this into housing for quite some time. Actually acquired it 6 years ago or so. It's just been a roller coaster of trying to develop this particular property. So we were trying to develop it without actually getting any change, and we just want to, you know, acquire for it as we were working to do a development. But we met some roadblocks, which I guess what the city wanted at the time, as far as how we were going to develop it, the number of affordable, just it was a back and forth. But I think we, you know, especially on our side, we all willing to move the project forward as needed. So then, so now we're just trying to just get it on change and develop the property instead of carrying it on for a few more years.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further questions? So I think that's it for us. Thank you.
Thank you, appreciate you. Thank you so much.
We'll call our next presenter for the ADUS. ADUs. Good evening.
Good evening.
It's good to see you. It's good to see me also. Thank you. Your name and
Good to
address.
see you too,
Thank
Alder.
you. Your name and address for the record, please.
Esther Rose Weiland, Assistant Director of Comprehensive Planning, 126 Edward Street.
Barbara.
And Michael Pinto, Assistant Corporation Counsel, 507 Central Avenue.
Great, thank you. So what we're not gonna do is we're not gonna go through the whole presentation again.
Okay.
And that should make you very happy, right? But what we do wanna do is, colleagues, if you have anything to add that maybe wasn't covered in our last meeting, and see if colleagues have any questions, whatever you may share today or whatever was in the last meeting, and then we'll take it from there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I guess knowing that we'll not go through our whole presentation, there's a few things that I'd like to draw to your attention, things that I know that you had questions about previously. And I know that owner occupancy is one of those issues that is of interest to everyone. My approach to the owner occupancy requirements, and my thinking about that is that that some of the considerations around owner occupancy are related to maintenance requirements. And as I presented last time, and I just want to reiterate, my thought is that the maintenance requirements for any housing should be over and above the ADU ordinance. They should be not restricted to the ADU ordinance alone. So if we're considering how maintenance, housing maintenance occurs and those regulations, those are things we should be doing, and we should be doing outside of the ADU ordinance. I believe that adding that to the ADU ordinance will unnecessarily restrict the creation of housing that's so desperately needed in the city. So you'll see a slide here at the end of the deck that sort of outlines what other communities have found to be successful components of a successful ADU program. That includes the updated zoning regulations, effective enforcement, the big piece of that, and financing options. And as you mentioned last time, there are some proposals being developed for supporting ADU development. So those are all that I wanted to emphasize. There's really no additional information that I have to present to you, but I'm happy to give you the slides or content that I had previously.
Thank you. Oh, did you want to? Do you want to? I should have passed this out. And she was, Director Brown was referencing the last page with the circles. There it is. Big circle. Good. And with this, we'll open it up to questions, colleagues. Alder Saban.
Thank you. In your presentation last time, you mentioned, I guess, that the city maybe wasn't 100% sure about the impact of building more ADUs on housing affordability in the city, which I was a little surprised about. I think this research I've seen is, if we're building more of these units, and are generally more likely to be not necessarily capital A, capital H affordable because they're food restricted, but they're smaller and I think that would have an impact on affordability. And so I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that research related to that issue. Maybe that's not necessarily completely specific to the ADUs, but just generally about the impact of building more sort of small sized housing in the city and what kind of impact that might have.
Yeah, so there's a memo that was in your materials as well that reviews some of the affordability impacts, likely impacts of EDUs. And as mentioned, we don't have research from Connecticut to draw from on exactly what people need. There's a couple of things to consider in terms of affordability. One is that ADU housing units tend to be smaller than other housing, and so they tend to be priced more affordably, even if they're not deed restricted housing. They're also more efficient because they're smaller and they can be built units that reduce the cost of utilities for either the tenant or the homeowner. So those are things that contribute to affordability. Another ways they're contributing to affordability by creating more housing, which increases the supply and would move into ADUs, freeing up other more affordable housing. So the supply and demand. That said, housing supply and demand dynamics are complicated. Housing economics is very complicated. So can we say definitely that a few ADUs are going to decrease the increase affordability in New Haven? No, but it's one piece of the pie, and it's an important step toward improving affordability overall by increasing the supply of housing units.
Thank you. Thank you.
Before we go on, I'd just like to recognize a colleague from the 22nd Ward, Alder Morrison. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just adding that the part of this removing the owner occupancy requirement and the other sort of additional loosening of the regulatory structure that we had initially put in place in the past, because we realized that it's much easier to put, to make the modifications. Something we weren't quite sure what happened. But by loosening the overall regulatory scheme and the whole package that we put together will reduce that regulatory burden, and that makes it a little bit more expensive, a little less expensive to construct. And that combined with will allow financing support, then that makes it that much easier to increase the overall number, and just to having more housing will at least dampen some of the increasing effects of rising rents.
Thank you, Alder. Any further questions? Alder Rodriguez?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I see that you're putting it's components of a successful ADU program. So you're I know it's just a word, but you're putting it as an ADU program, and you're also saying effective enforcement. So who would do the enforcement if there was a problem? If an ADU was constructed in.
Yeah, so right now, LCI is responsible for housing enforcement, and there's a slide on the in the of your slide on the residential rental license. So currently, those multifamily structures that are 3 units or below that are owner occupied are not subject to the residential rental business license through LCI, and would not be subject to their inspection. If it were not owner occupied, it would be. So LCI would be conducting inspections. So that is an exemption. If it's owner occupied, 3 units or less, it is not subject the residential rental business licenses, the licensure.
It's actually two units. So even owner occupied residential licensing, at 3 units, it is still subject to.
Excuse me.
No, all right.
Chair, is, you mentioned that this would help with affordability. With the affordability component. So are you, just clarify, is there going to be a restriction on what owners of the ADUs, is on what they could charge?
No.
What they choose to do?
No, yeah, there would be no,
Thank you, Mr. Chair, that was my question.
Thank you, Alder Evelyn Rodriguez.
Yes. In reference to the zones that have been identified, the use that are not owner occupied, would those owners be living in those zones or do they live outside the city? Thank you. Mr. Chair.
that's a good question. There would be no restriction on where the owners live.
And
Sure.
okay. In reference to affordability, we use the term very freely of what is really affordability. So if the landlord does not give this for all intents and purposes for his house that has the ADU attached, he could rent the house and also the ADU to different individuals. Is that correct? Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further questions? Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for coming back and for the additional information. I'm looking at that Venn diagram with the 3 circles, and there's one circle that talks about financing, which is obviously not part of this.
No,
I'm scratching my head trying to think, where is there financing for AD development? I'm trying to think, is there perhaps some program that's funded by ARPA dollars that is going to that, or is that just like a good intention of the administration has that at some point in the future there would be a financing program that assists people to develop? Because I don't know that.
there's not a current program. You want to speak to that? I understand that there are some options to be explored for the possible use of, I don't know if they have the funding, to be quite honest. But, I'd like to make this to allow her to speak.
Try this.
Thank you. My name is Michael Piscatelli. I'm the Economic Development Administrator for the city. I live at 353 7th Street in New Haven. Good question. We've actually had two teams working on this. One economic development, led by Michael and his team over at LCI to figure out a program that's going to support homeowners and to make ADUs more accessible to them. There's a high price point at actually convert, say, a garage or something to a unit. I wish we could give you more details now, but I'm a little concerned. I want to make sure we have utility numbers right. So the way the building goes is you still hook up to separate utilities. So they're scheduling the utility needs now to actually lay out what it costs to have a sewer line or something like that. So we get the program scoped right. And then it's the board reserving money for various development agreements. And that's one source. We'll take this to the Affordable Housing Commission and to you, but that's the source that's been in our mind to support homeowners that I want to give you accessory dwelling.
Thank you for reminding us about that. We did a mechanism to gather some funding. It's interesting to, in one of our future finance meetings, to see how much we have. But thank you for that additional information. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further questions? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can these ADUs that that will be, can they be, will they be considered, we say for affordable housing or housing, not affordable per se, but for businesses? Have you looked at that? Thank you.
These will be for dwelling units, not for businesses.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder. Any further questions? I have a few questions that I would like to ask, and some of it is maybe legal, as we're just trying to get our head around. First, I want to thank you for your work on this. This is an important project. It's an important ordinance. I think what we started was we were off to a good start. We saw some things that needed to be amended. And so I want to first say that we appreciate your work on this. And so if we drag on it, it's only because we're trying to get our heads around what this is going to look like in 10, 15, 20 years. And I think that it's important for us to always keep that in mind as we're trying to meet or solve one issue, that we don't create another issue down the road. And I'm saying that because I'm thinking, and I'm taking a little bit of latitude as chair to kind of talk a bit more before but this is going to help us in our voting colleagues. So I'm kind of set it up. We had this issue some years ago with projects, right? So thinking about Brookside, Church Street South, and at the time it seemed to be a good idea. But then 40 years later, we discovered that I'm calling it the projects, was not a good idea. So now we've started a new experiment, and we're doing mixed income. And we're going to see how this is going to work in 20 or 30 years. And I think we might be on the right path, but history's going to tell us. And so this is one thing that also we want to get right and not quickly, so that we're not solving one need and creating another issue down the road. My question now is, so these ADUs are going to go into areas that are already dense. So how is this going to affect our asthma rates that are already prevalent in these areas? I live in an area that's not real, it's kind of dense, I guess, where I live. The houses are pretty close together. And if I imagine a house behind my house, where children in a third floor play, there's going to be no more space because setbacks or it's still back there. So where are the children going to play and breathe? That's a concern. My other concern is, and these are kind of questions, right, for us to kind of think through and discuss. My other concern is with the Airbnbs, short-term rentals. We don't have any regulations on that now. So if I were to build an accessible attic, then I'm going to want to recoup my money. So the intention of this is to be affordable housing. Yet we're not able to regulate. We don't have rent control. So a legal question is, would we be able to put something in place regarding how much these could be rented as? So that's along with the short rentals. So this is the first set of my questions that I'm just a little concerned about. And if you have some feedback on that, that would be great. If we need some time between now and then, but these are my concerns. That's what I would do. If I were to build, I need to recoup. This is not a $20,000 project. And so if I was to build another house, it's not going to be affordable to get this money back. So I'm not going to try to recoup it in 20 years. I need to make a profit. The floor is yours. Anything you,
Like start and have a team more in detail. So we share a lot of the concerns you have, right? If we're evaluating a new program and we've done a rigorous study of that, that still has some of the same uncertainties that you're describing. So don't think that we're coming in here hopefully confident it's going to be great. I mean, like I think we've learned to have some humility going through this. But I would offer a couple of things. The first is we're seeing the crowding you're concerned about now. So there's a fire somewhere. The one on Fifth Avenue, 19 people this week. We have high density around already, largely due to families doubling up. And many of the speakers tonight probably with more first understanding than we even. So a lot of that is the pressure on housing today. In terms of short-term rentals, I think we're wide that, and some enabling legislation from the state of Connecticut, some guidance that will stand up to court. We all want something to short-term rentals because it's constraining access to housing for people locally, and it's hurting the hotel market as well. So there's little reasons there. So don't disagree on something to help out the state. The other thing I would suggest is that the time and space to study relative to doing is something that we know we've got to do. And I think we saw that with the telehouses. We know that pressure of not doing enough is creating circumstances where the telehouses have no running water, they have no plumbing, they have no nothing. They don't need the building code. And this needs to be building code. So I would just suggest that you consider maybe an evaluation technique. Zoning is flexible. Like we put zoning in place, if in 3 years we don't like it, you can change the zoning. Like there's an opportunity there to create a pathway whereby we embark on this journey, and if this goes off the rail, you can give us guidance. In 3 years, we're going to evaluate this, and we can go down that road. But I would suggest that the overcrowding we see today, we don't see it directly, but it is there.
the only problem with changing zoning is that whatever's there is grandfathered in.
That's right.
And so our problem area is, if it is a problem, it's going to remain a problem. You just can't do it somewhere else.
And I think we've learned, from the first ADU phase one, it's not as if the barnyard door opens. We'll see some. It will not be the only technique to unlock the issue we have statewide. And feel free to add better.
I appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. Thank you.
Yeah, I wanted to address your concerns about the loss of green space too, and that is something that I know various fellows have considered when this was initially proposed, and we've looked at as well. I think Director Huber's last presentation addressed the likelihood where areas some of these be, and this they are proposed and are currently allowed in the RM and the RS zones. So the RS zones are residential single family. There are least dense zones, and those are the zones that this was initially proposed or envisioned for more integration of the slightly denser housing versus significantly densifying the already dense, high density zones. So single family zones are, and that would be, like I said, it wouldn't necessarily be adding a lot of to existing high density areas, but lower density areas also. That makes sense?
So give us, just for colleagues, give us a Main Street that's RS.
There are a lot of West Coast RS.
Say we're on the street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Upper West.
Sure.
That's where our pushback is.
Director Roseland would like to address that as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in and add that the lot coverage requirement remains, which is, I know it's 30% in the RS, is it in the RM as well?
I believe so.
So you can still only cover 30%, including principal structure and addition ADU, that counts toward that 30%. So if you have a small lot, it's going to be very challenging to meet that requirement. And so that's you're not gonna see a situation where the entire backyard would be taken up by an ADU as a.
I think that was Director Hendren's point, with the larger lots would be more intended for these anyway. It's the additional lot fully occupied a lot.
Yeah, so that's 70% of the lot that's not building on it, and 30% of the lot that does.
Except you're putting people there with their grills and their dogs and, okay. Yeah, I'm just getting, I'm just throwing that out there because we have a vibrant discussion about this.
Yes.
I find this fascinating. Attorney, did you want, were you finished, Director?
Yes, I'm also happy.
Did you want to address whether we have the ability?
Was the, we call it rent control, but to the extent that, in the same way there's a deed restriction. So I don't think there's a direct impediment, legal impediment to it. It will, however, cut down. I mean, it will see part of the, part of this stage of phase 2 and phase 3 was to envision and sort of plan to relax the envelope and create what are sort of more referred to as naturally. These things can be very expensive. However, I think some of the research that's shows that many ADUs are actually effectively below market rate because they even with the restriction, the owner occupant restrictions, most get built by owner in other cities. The research appears to show that majority of the ADU units are actually by owner occupants, and so even without the legal restriction, the legal requirement, that's where the majority of the development comes from. And in the place it used to be referred to as like mother-in-law apartments. So there is a natural tendency to be rented effectively below market, what would be market rate, obviously. And simply adding more units will help dampen on the ADUs that are being built for years and almost like tenants. Just adding more units and freeing up, and if someone needs a small unit somewhat less, that then also frees up another naturally affordable.
But what are your thoughts? Not necessarily short-term rentals, not necessarily, but what are your thoughts about regulations around Airbnbs and short-term rentals? That this would most likely be, they're going to recoup money fast.
I think it's possible that some will be used as short-term rentals. I don't think all of them will. I think there's probably some pent-up demand for of owner occupants that want to start creating ADUs, but have not been able to meet the requirements, or owners of several properties around the city, small landlords that would like to do this. That said, we've explored several goals in the past several years, the possibility of including regulations around rentals. And because I also oversee the enforcement work group, which is a group of interdepartmental group that meets bi-weekly on enforcement issues, I know that these come up, the short-term rentals come up as an issue, but they're not frequent. I'd say they're not our biggest issue related to enforcement in the city. And so the analysis has been, is it worth the effort to put this in place for the small number of these that are actually problem properties? And we come to the conclusion that at this time, probably not, but we have it ready to go and to move forward if there's a time we want to. And we'll continue to monitor the situation to move that forward when we're ready. Something that we could.
That's what I was wondering. I know we as a city have the ability
Yeah.
to create some kind of ordinance regarding that. If we want to do that first, should we do an ordinance for short-term rentals first before we do an ordinance? I just can't say that.
At this point, like I said, I don't see short-term rentals as our biggest enforcement issue right now. It's maybe something that we
Oh,
want.
but they're everywhere. They really are.
They're everywhere.
I mean, neighbors are complaining that, I mean, we hear it. Talking about the Airbnbs is that you don't know where, you know the area, but you don't know the address, and they show you pictures of the inside, but you don't know that you could be in a backyard.
Yeah.
And then also with the pricing, am I going to pay $1,500 to stay in a garage for an apartment? Just, what's the realistic price? Where's the starting price that these ADUs are going to start at? It's not going to start affordable. How can it? And so they're going to start at $1,500 to live in a garage. Who's going to stay there? Students. That's right. And my final question is, and thank you for being so positive. My final question is, I think the state was considering, and I'm not sure if it's going through a state group, but they were considering having these temporary shelter pallets be allowed in New Haven, Waterbury, Bridgeport. And I'm not sure if that's passed, or where that stands. And so I'm wondering if, since that's being considered there, how that would affect this.
So I don't know this, do you know this specific legislation?
There would be no relation to the current bill making its way through the legislature of nonprofit religious owned properties. This is more focused on building code compliance.
But they would approve the bill. We have a lot of nonprofits. Doesn't have to be a church. Great, thank you. Those are my questions. Any other questions from colleagues?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Rodriguez.
Thank you. As I said there, I'm going to ask a question. How many, what's the square foot that ADUs are allowed to be built on? My understanding.
Yeah, I believe it's a minimum of 400 and a maximum of 1,200.
Another question, Mr. Chair.
Certainly.
How many ADUs, if I wanted to do an ADUs in my property, how many can I build?
One. At this point, one. That's what's allowed and what's being proposed. We're not proposing to add any.
And Mr. Chair, my final question, I go back to effective enforcement. I build it, I rent it, and now I have problems with my surrounding neighbors because I have someone who I rent to who is in the neighborhood. Enforcement again, enforcement. Besides calling the police. What? The owner has a responsibility. But what safeguards the owner now that they have to do? They have to evict this person. So we have to take the surrounding neighborhoods, you know.
Just consider that some of the ADUs and those that are currently permitted would be a basement unit, an attic unit, things within an existing building that may already be there. So
Thank you. It was just 3 months.
yeah.
Thank you. Any other questions from committee? I really thank you for coming back and giving us some more detail and food for thought. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We'll ask if there's anyone public to testify. I didn't ask for the first item. I should have asked if anyone from the public wishes to testify on item. So move today. Anyone wish to testify on item number 1 or item number 2? Thank you. Item 1 or 2. I'm just going Okay. I will call Johnny, 277 St. John Street. I didn't want to mess up your last name. Welcome.
You wouldn't be the first person. It's Shively.
Name and address for the record, please.
Hello, my name is Johnny Shively. I live at 277 St. John Street in New York. A housing policy manager at City Communities. And I'm here to voice my support for the amendment proposed by City Plan for New Haven's ADU ordinance. Like members of City Plan earlier, the amendments proposed for the ADU ordinance won't single-handedly solve New Haven's housing crisis, but according to the department's analysis, it will enable the creation of 4,000 new units of housing in the city and remove barriers for local property owners who want to add to our city's housing stock. The existing research tells us that this will meaningfully impact New Haven's housing crisis. It will slow rent growth and reduce average rents across the city. And to me, that feels like something worth fighting for. I want to touch a little bit tonight on one of the issues that I know has come up around this ordinance, which has to do with the owner occupancy requirement. I know that there's a legitimate concern that ADUs will be primarily developed by absentee landlords and that they'll fall into states of disrepair and be a blight on the neighborhood. And this concern makes a lot of sense to me because it's a pattern that we see with other kinds of properties around the city. So it's clear that generally we, as a city, need to do more to prevent the patterns from continuing. But I don't see owner occupancy requirements for ADUs as the best way of dealing with absentee landlords. For one thing, existing research tells us that ADUs are mostly built by local homeowners, as was mentioned earlier, even in places where owner occupancy requirements have been eliminated. So in California, where there's a statewide ban on owner occupancy requirements for ADUs, only 8% of ADUs are developed by corporate entities. The rest are developed by individuals. And in Portland, Oregon, as many as 90% of ADUs are built by homeowner developers. These numbers bode well for New Haven and suggest that ADUs will primarily be developed by local property owners, even if we eliminate requirement. I would also argue that the city has, as was already mentioned, better options for dealing with divergent landlords who require owner occupancy for ADUs. As a city, we should be investing more resources into LCI, implementing stronger tenant protections, and pursuing strategies that catalyze local property ownership and ADU development. Requiring owner occupancy is a solution that will prevent many local property owners from creating housing that our city desperately needs. And it's a solution that does nothing for all of the properties already being neglected by absentee landlords. And finally, as was also mentioned, I want to point out that the development of ADUs in New Haven will most likely be gradual. We won't see 4,000 ADUs spring up overnight. So as ADUs are developed over time, we can evaluate the impacts of eliminating the owner occupancy requirement and assess who is developing ADUs in New Haven. The city's Affordable Housing Commission could include this analysis in their annual report, for example, to the city's board of elders. And that information could be used to revise the ordinance in the future if things seem to be getting out of hand. So for those reasons, I encourage this committee to advance the ordinance as it's written. I sincerely appreciate your time and welcome any questions.
Any questions from committee?
Yes.
Alderman Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for your testimony. Could you say a little bit about the studies that you cited? Who conducted the studies and when were they conducted and so on?
Absolutely. So the study, I referenced two studies. One had to do with who was developing ADUs in California, and one had to do with Portland, Oregon. The California one was conducted, I'll look this up again later, but I believe it was in 2018 by researchers at the Turner Housing Center at UC Berkeley. I consider them to be a reputable organization. And the data for Portland is from a book called The Backdoor Revolution, or The Backyard Revolution, written by an ADU expert operating out of Portland, Oregon, who's led a lot of the ADU initiatives. Oh, and that was published in 2020, I believe.
Thank you very much. And the chair, if we can just ask for those citations. Give them, I'm grateful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alderman Marchand. Any further questions? I just have one, because I find statistics very interesting. And we hear a lot of statistics as it relates to other cities and towns compared to New Haven. And the thought that always comes to my head is that's not apples to apples. And so, to quote Oregon and the city of California, I wonder what the population is. And not just the population, but how many rentals, we have 70% of that's rental property. This is not just some rental stuff. My question would also be, I wonder how many people in those areas have data management companies that have the ability to be at the forefront of this market and build much more than possibly our local homeowners. And so I wonder if anything that you've researched kind of gave a better comparison of what our home stock, those that own so many properties in this city are like compared to the other cities you mentioned.
Yeah, I appreciate this question because you're completely right. California, but as a state, has so many more residents than we do. And I think the population of Portland, Oregon is around 600,000 or 700,000 residents, obviously much larger than New Haven. Those are the only pieces of research that I was able to find that had to do, that dealt specifically with who is developing ADUs between local homeowners and corporate developers. So to me, they are apples to apples, I completely agree. And it's the data that we have on this particular topic. It's possible that more exists, but I don't know about it. What I will say is that I know that in Portland and many parts of California, the housing markets are extremely hot. And I know that in New Haven, there's a desire from developers to be building here. So I think that's a similarity between our areas. And I know that, you know, I'll call it an issue of corporate landlords developing and acquiring properties is a nationwide issue that I know is present in both Oregon and California, like it is here. So there are different places, of course. Those are a couple of similarities. And as far as I know, this is the only research that's been done about who's been developing ADUs.
Thank you. Your testimony was phenomenal. Very Any other questions from the committee? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you. In reference to your research, did you find the reasoning behind the research in reference to defining the problem? For example, here we had our presenters talk about affordable housing, and we know that in New Haven, there's a serious problem with looking at ways that we can address housing, but not just housing, because housing, anyone could come and live in a home. We're looking at affordable housing. So in defining the problem and the research and the work that you did you find that in the response and the work that you did for this presentation today, did you look at that problem and see business, people just doing houses because they want to do business, they want to have money, they want to be lucrative, or was Was it because they were, like us, addressing the issue of affordable housing in our city? Thank you.
So what I noticed in my research, and I don't have any stats in front of me for this question, but what I found is that generally ADUs are actually, there are experts who seem to think that ADUs are less profitable than other kinds of developments, that they, cost more to produce than they sort of generate and profit, and for that reason that they are not as attractive for folks who are solely interested in developing as a form of profiting. And I don't have evidence to support this, but in my mind, that could be a reason why they are more popular among local homeowners. What I did notice in my research is that a lot of ADUs are rented out by the local homeowner who develops them. They're rented out to family members, to elderly friends and family connections, to young people, and that in those sorts of relationships, the ADUs actually are rented substantially below market rate. So often the people who are developing ADUs are in a way taking a loss on them so that a relative or a friend of the family or some other connection can live in the place at a price that's affordable to them. So there's kind of this interesting informal aspect of affordability to ADUs that the literature does reflect.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Thank you very much. If you can get the card from staff, and she'll give it to us where you can send back the information that is requested. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate you being here. Thanks. Next on the list, Kevin Alvarez.
Hello, everyone. Good evening. Kevin Alvarez, 98 Clinton Avenue in the Fairhaven neighborhood of New Haven. It's nice to be with you all, and I was not actually originally planning on speaking on this tonight, but I'm very, very passionate about creating more housing in the city of New Haven, and I'm a member of the Housing Authority for the city. I think the main thing that I wanted to say was, first, to speak in support of this ADU amendment. I think it is vitally important that we are taking every opportunity we can to create more housing units. I know that is something that this board has been incredibly committed to. And I think this is a strange thing, actually. I previously worked for the city of New Haven 4 years ago. The first meeting that we had between the mayor's office and the Board of Alderman leadership, Alderman Morrison, you had said that you were really frustrated that so often we speak in terms that are just about this number of housing units and this percentage of that and this percentage of this. But you wanted us to always remember that we were talking about people in people's lives, and that you wanted to think about things with the heart of somebody who cares about the community. And that has stuck with me since our first meeting. And when I think about this issue, I'm thinking about how many families right now and individuals are trapped in housing that is far too expensive for them. How many families are trapped with absentee landlords because they do not have other options? New Haven County has the lowest rental vacancy rate in the state of Connecticut. Connecticut has the lowest rental vacancy rate in the United States, if I'm not mistaken, if those numbers say that's the last time that I looked at them. And that is creating a dire situation for so many of our residents where rents are going up, landlords are held less accountable because people do not have options. And so I think when one of the reasonable concerns about some of the changes in this, the idea that there are going to be landlords that have more freedom to the absentee landlord. I actually think that this is helpful in creating more options for individuals that are struggling right now. And I think for every time we talk about units of housing, we're talking about people's lives and individuals that will walk into that housing unit when they have an ADU that they can access and they can afford, that will have an opportunity that they did not have before because of actions taken by this board. And when I worked at the city of New Haven, so many of the problems that we face with the housing crisis is things outside of our control. It is a lot of towns around us that are not taking the actions necessary. And time and again, the city of New Haven has been the leader on issues related to housing. And I think this gives us an opportunity again to show people in the state what you can and should do, even other cities in the state. For cities that are comparable, the city of Stanford is generally has a wealthier sort of base of its population, but it's relatively similar in size. It has relatively similar levels of carbon, and there is a huge push, sometimes from the legislative branch, to stop the development of housing. And unlike so many other places, the city of New Haven has been consistently responsive to the needs of its residents. And so I urge that you support this because I think it will create more opportunities for people that deserve it and for our residents that we care about, who are our neighbors and who are our friends, who are way too hot of rents in this state. And through creating more of these units will give them more of an opportunity to live with dignity and have a somewhere at the end of the day to call home and to find some sense of security and comfort. And so that is why I urge that you support this. And I am so grateful for all your time, all of the work that you put into this issue and so many others. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't have any of the names on the list. Was there anyone else that would like to testify in regards to this item? There's somebody familiar approaching. Mr. Stratton, welcome.
Good evening, Chair.
Good evening.
Sure. My name is Ben Tracton. I'm a real estate attorney with an office at 609 State Street in New Haven, Connecticut, 06511.
You can just swivel that microphone in front of you.
Oh, God. Great. And a resident of 80 Woodside Terrace, New Haven, Connecticut, for 4 years plus. Being supported the new phase of the accessory dwelling ordinance amendment this evening. Through representations of Board of Zoning Appeals, City Planning Commission, I get a lot of approvals from apartments and existing structures. You can call them accessory dwelling units, but at the end of the day, they're just normal apartments with no difference in compliance. State and federal codes and work is both for non-owner occupants, sometimes for bigger landlords, but often for New Haven residents of all colors, incomes, who own a multifamily or two. I know you have concerns about the owner occupancy requirement being lifted, and I believe it won't make a difference at all. Investors who want a single dwelling unit will not convert all their garages into ADUs. But there are very few. Converting basements, third floors, garages, and discussed by me with a broad range of mega landlords. And I only have 2 plans for the housing strategy with a few applications each month. The cost to install required utilities for the garage in compliance with the building code typically doesn't justify the investment in the rent from a sale. The requirements written in phase 2 and 3 that a special exception be obtained for the 4 units with existing property is an additional safeguard made into the ordinance. Investors are aware of the financial returns when they spend their money. As you saw with the original iteration of the ADU ordinance, none were created. It's mostly because of cost. There's dozens of single-family and multi-family owner-occupied homeowners, and none of them were able to work financially. Some of my favorite projects for the last few years were garage-based apartments. I've been dragged out to see them after they were finished by clients, and they were all new code-compliant housing options that didn't previously exist. Some were previously illegal units that the owner inherited and made legal after full Office of Building Enforcement, permitting, construction, and inspection. Basement and garage apartments are particularly desirable to tenants. I've shown examples of how aesthetically pleasing these turn out to be to PCA on numerous occasions to sort of eliminate the stigma that's attached to basements and garages. We saw a presentation from staff at a meeting about the ADUs that you didn't want to see today. My take on that presentation is that some of the information in it was hopeful at best. One stated increased affordable housing choice, especially for residents of all income levels, including very, very low income residents. This won't happen. ADUs won't be affordable for very low income folks who are a +1 system. They're simply too expensive. Item 2 states that they will provide housing that responds to changing family needs, smaller households, and increasing housing costs. This is absolutely true, except for that housing costs. This will do very little to alleviate higher rents. Item 3 states creating new housing while respecting the scale and fabric of neighborhood patterns of development. This is somewhat accurate, but to the extent that there will be bigger garage and additional apartments, it's nothing like the conflict that the visionary zone to pass through the cause. Item 4 in that presentation stated that the change will support more efficient use of housing stock. This is absolutely true. Putting garages with people is far preferable to junk in cars. People can rent a storage locker for their junk and manage their vehicle use appropriately in their driveway. Item 5 states that the ordinance amendment offers environmentally friendly housing with less average space per person and smaller associated carbon footprints. I think this is a stretch, but I'm not qualified to discuss carbon footprints. So the housing code and state codes determine the unit size. The market will determine it, but 400 to 200 unit square foot units is desirable and have a price. These square footages being a typical size I see for garages. Down the stairs. Item 6, create small contractor workforce opportunities. This is absolutely true. Our mega landlords, I know you have general dislike for them. Our mega landlords, homeowners, and everyone in between will be looking to the smaller local contractors for these projects. They already do. Mega landlords have cultivated their own workforce in the surrounding town. It's not going to be money flowing out of the city. In 7 states, and this is important, but illegal rental units into compliance. This ordinance is nothing else than a pathway to legalize illegal apartments and basements, garages, many of which likely predate the zoning ordinance. For poor record cycles of staff turnover, these apartments fall through the cracks time and time again. Just this facet of the ordinance alone justifies your yes vote. By legalizing these types of units without zoning relief, you are providing a direct path to safe and secure housing without burdening LCI with much enforcement, relocation costs, and expense. Owners will pull permits, whether owner occupied or not, and will have inspections by the building department. This will positively impact home values, tax collection, and these units are properly reflected in assessment records. Most of these units are at affordable small rents, but are impossible to track because they aren't reflected in any records that are illegal. When they're discovered, owners come to me to get them legitimated through a very lengthy and precarious zoning process. Ask for relief like a variance to permit residential use in an accessory structure within the side and rear setback way too often. It's really easy to explain, but it's the kind of phrase that this ordinance will help eliminate. I think it's speaking support as an attorney and a resident. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony. Any questions from the committee? I would like to say I do not have a general dislike for our mega landlords.
I hope.
I don't, but I do have a general dislike for a property owner that allows their property to go into disarray and ignore it. And so that would be the difference. Sometimes properties go into disarray and everyone's trying to get their money together to repair. That's different than ignoring blighted property. But thank you for your testimony, Mr. Tracton. It's always great to hear from you. We'll ask that you leave that testimony with our staff already emailed and you have his name already. Okay, great.
Okay.
You're all set. Good to see you. Anyone else from the public wishing to testify? I see that hand. Come on down. Good evening, your name and address.
Good evening, my name's Claudette Kidd. I live at Howard Avenue, New Haven. Just going to keep it short and sweet. I'm in support of the ordinance.
Thank you.
That's it. I'm really tired. I'm asleep.
You're going safe.
All the rest. I just wanted to come and support.
Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
All the rest.
Anyone else wishing to testify on this item? Anyone else wishing to testify on this item? Is there anyone who would like to testify on items 1 or 2? Done. We will go to item 3. three is,
Mayor's chief of staff.
it seems like it, requested.
He can only get his papers together.
Approving the request for an exception to the city charter requirement concerning the electoral status for the city's chief administrative officer. Welcome, Mr. Madison, the name of the director, please.
Yes, sir. My name is Sean Madison, and I'm with the Invincible 12th Ward, 1279, Quinnipiac County.
Thank you, sir. You have the floor.
Appreciate it much. Good evening, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I thank you for the opportunity to address you today. As the Chief of Staff of New Haven, it's my privilege to advocate for these decisions that advance the well-being of the community. I appear before you today to present a matter crucial to the continued effective governance of the city. The request for an exception to the elector status requirement for Chief Administrative Officer, Ms. Virginia Rush Kittle. Ms. Rush Kittle has been a cornerstone of the city's administration on her life, providing dedication, exceptional leadership. Since assuming the role as CAO, she's consistently exceeded the expectations, progress, and innovation in various city projects and initiatives. The ordinance established a framework for the exception to the elector status, provides a path for situations like Ms. Rush Kittle. She meets the criteria outlined in the ordinance. For over 12 months in a role, and that qualifies her for consideration. She's demonstrated a need and a hardship, notably financial and emotional strength to maintain dual residence away from the family. The request, accompanied by an affidavit, provides some of the reasons on the hardships faced align with the ordinance requirement. And the loss of Ms. Rush Kittle as a CAO would negatively impact operations of the police, create potential collateral delays in service, create a vacuum of leadership over significant departments that residents or constituents and require. Now, we'll just have a moment to explain why supporting the granting of this exception is good for the city. Ms. Rush Kittle's unwavering dedication and exceptional performance have significantly advanced the city's progress. Back in 2022, the city was launching a search for a new police chief, national search. Ms. Rush Kittle fulfilled the requirement for us to have a police chief. During the period of transition and vacancy in the position, Ms. Rush Kittle stepped up and assumed the responsibilities of the acting police chief. Under her leadership, the police department continued to effectively serve the residents of the city. And I would also point out that during that time that the CAO found herself also dealing with the Randy Cox case. The CAO did not shrink from that responsibility, rather she kind of leaned into it. She worked with state troopers on the investigation towards transparency in a matter. Her steadfast hand guided the department through a very difficult period of time. Had a lesser person been in the role at that moment, I will not tender a rest on the outcomes. When faced with a vacancy in the human resources manager position, after Steve Lebrandi left, Ms. Rush Kittle assumed the additional responsibilities of acting human resources manager. She continued forward with the HR processes, worked towards practices, ensured compliance with employment laws and regulations. During her time as the acting HR manager, the department didn't skip a beat. It didn't delay any testing or hiring. She just made it work, ultimately benefiting the city's workforce and the services they provide. Most recently, she was required to assume another role. She wasn't asked to do so. She just did it. Ms. Rush Kittle took on the role of the acting emergency management director after Mr. Fontana This is a role of responsibility, coordinating city's response efforts to ensuring safety and well-being. While this is an additional role for her, the work wasn't foreign to her. She was formerly the state's Deputy Commissioner of Emergency Management. Her leadership as the CAO exemplifies a commitment to the best interests of the state and then facing risk. The Personnel Director reviewed the request and confirmed the need and hardship pertaining to residences and is opposing a significant burden and the emotional strain after separation from her husband underscores request. Absent the exception, it's entirely likely that Ms. Rush Kittle will separate her employment from the city of New Haven. The request for the exception aligns with the criteria outlined in the ordinance passed by you all. Her situation warrants consideration for the exception to the elected requirement, as it meets the standard of necessity set by you. In conclusion, I urge the committee to carefully consider the city's request for the exception to the elector status requirement. Granting the exception is not only justified, but continued effective governance of New Haven. Ms. Rush Kittle spent the entirety of her professional career in the service of others. Career military, fighting to defend the nation, career law enforcement, service of Connecticut residents, public safety guardian, now in service of people of our city. Time and time again, Ms. Rush Kittle has heard the call to serve and answered it. And ask that you not miss the opportunity to keep her here in our community. Appreciate your attention to the matter, and I appreciate the deliberation will result in a decision that serves best the community. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Madison, for your presentation. We'll go to questions, but let me remind colleagues, and in the letter from personnel that says waiver, but this is not a waiver, it's an exception. And I'd like to also remind colleagues, if you should have any questions, that this is not pertaining to Ms. Rush Kittle's performance, but it is pertaining to whether or not she has a hardship that would grant her this exception to the electoral and residency requirement. And so having said that, I will ask if there are any questions from the committee. Is it on the digest or? Okay, I'll ask one. I'm just wondering, in the spirit of which this ordinance was created, and I know the bulk of it, we approved it, but the bulk of it did come from the administration and helping us in court counsel helping us craft this. Where do you feel that emotional distress would fit into granting an exception?
Well, I mean, I think the stress of being apart from your spouse who resides 30 minutes away on a nightly basis. I think that's one more reason not to be willing to do the job. Again, she's pulled double duty and many times although she's been here. Regina's a very talented person. She has a lot of options in life. And at the end of the day, if it's a choice between being able to go home at night, spend a little bit of time with her spouse, not to mention the financial impact of also maintaining two different residences. Sometimes logical people would say like that's a reasonable choice, but she enjoys the job, enjoys the work, and she wants to continue serving the people. So yeah, I do think that those things do impact in ours, and impressed with UH over time. Many of you spend many hours here in deliberations, during the budget season, and it's time that you're away from families or friends. But these things do over time.
Thank you, Mr. Madison. Just, yes, I'll yield to Alderman Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to check with our mayor's chief of staff. My understanding is that this exception shouldn't be granted. It would apply just to Ms. Rush Kittle and all the duration of her term of office in this particular role. Is that correct?
That is my understanding.
And just to be really clear, it seems to me that there, look, I do appreciate comments about her performance. It's information to understand in general, but as far as the grounds for a waiver, there's really two assertions. One, that there's a hardship, emotional and financial. We've spoken. Second is that her living somewhere else would not be a detriment to our municipality, nor diminish her effectiveness and dedication for all. And could you say more about why your judgment that statement? Or would
I think that there are amazing women and men that come into work every single day for the city of New Haven and do an amazing job that don't reside in the city. They protect us, they teach us, pick up our garbage, in our parks. And we tend not to ever question how far they drive and where they come from. I think, for no further than where she would be coming from, she's reachable. One time she's not residing on state, which the ordinance prohibits. She would want to be about 30 minutes away, which if you've ever traveled from A1 Toyota across town during rush hour, it takes you just about 30 minutes to do so, right? It's kind of your neck of the woods, so you understand what I'm saying. So yeah, I don't think we really want to have volunteers in the city, not hostages. And I think if she exception, I believe we would lose her. I think she would be a loss to the city, and I do not believe that her driving 30 minutes to form a state trooper who can patrol the highways of the state. I don't think that the weather will bother her. I don't think that evening trip will bother her if needed. But the ability to always know at the end that you can go home and do what you think. I think that matters. And I think it will actually improve.
Well, thank you for that response. It's well worth considering. Another thing I was maybe trying to get at with that question is, there are particular functions in that require more or less proximity to the office because of the time-sensitive nature of functions or issues that those departments handle. So, for example, the chief administrative officer has the public safety departments, police, fire, 911, public safety communications, emergency management, and so public works, right? Those folks deal with blizzards and snowstorms and other matters of great urgency. And I've never been a chief administrative officer, and I have no problem to do that. So I don't know as much as you do perhaps about the ability of that coordinator to be responsive and available for her department heads and her departments in those urgent situations that her departments handle regularly. And so That's part of what I'm asking about. Because I don't doubt that she works hard and does a good job no matter where she's based, but she doesn't. I mean, she's dealing with all the departments that deal with the most urgent things.
Having a little bit of knowledge of the role of CAO, I would say that a lot of times, I mean, outside of immediate emergencies, we try to get ahead of things. When storms are coming, begin your preparation. When you're going to open up the emergency operations center. No, I don't think during times of replanning, it takes away anything. It role from the connection to the departments to give their direct guidance. And even in times of like when you're called out in the middle of the night for something, again, I don't believe the distance that she would need to be covering would take away anything from that. We've had very key personnel in emergency and public safety before reside, I believe, some distance out further, past Shelton, Orange, and really was not a hit to them. I can't imagine, 30 minutes to New Haven being a hindrance in guidance and guidance to the departments. She's extremely communicative and is very clear what she in her guidance to her department. So she's crystal clear. I don't think that because of the lack of communication or being 30 minutes away, it and again, I think a lot of times for storms, for events, get ahead of that, prepare for it. Calls in the middle of the night, you get up, you put your shoes on, you come in, hopefully dressed. Yes, dressed too, but you come in and I don't see that as an issue that would impact the direction to your departments.
Thank you for any questions from committee. I know this is basically about granting the exception for hardship. But just to remind colleagues, leapfrogging off of my colleague from the 23rd Ward, CAO is over public safety, PSAP, engineering, either in
Police, peace, human resource, engineering, DPW, budget passes parks, right now parks and DPW. And library is now under.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Great. Thank you. Any other questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Madison.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your consideration.
Thank you.
Anyone from the public wishing to testify on this item? Anyone from the public wishing to testify on this item? From the public wishing to testify on this item? Seeing none.
Mr. Chair, I move that we close the public portion of this meeting.
Second.
Having been moved and seconded to close the public portion of this item, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Abstaining? Portion is closed. Alderman Shannon.
Mr. Chair, I move item 1.
Item 1 has been moved and seconded. On this we will discussion. Alderman Shannon.
Mr. Chair, I move to amend by substitution.
Second. This item has been moved, or the motion is to move this item by substitution. Moved and seconded. Discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm making this motion at the suggestion of our staff person because the item was lacking some important, including a properly, including a resolution. So I call my colleagues' attention. It's actually pages 9, 10, 11, and 12 of the packet. These are the big numbers below right-hand corner. So you can see that 9 and 10 are the actual resolution that is required for section. And then 11 and 12 is the attachment A, the ordinance amendment, which is spells out what's happening. And then page 13 is attachment B, which shows some information about the location. And I think it's important that what we're talking about and what we discuss be brought up to date and be complete. And so I recommend colleagues to vote in support of the motion to amend by substitution. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Marchand. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of amending this item by substitution, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Back to the item as amended. Discussion. Alderman Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to speak in favor of this. An island of industrial zoning surrounded by residentially zoned areas is not helpful. In the spirit of the zoning ordinance to correct such errors that come up over time or odd situations that develop over time. And so on that score alone, it makes sense to make this map change so that that defined area is zoned in the same way as the surrounding areas. But I also think it's really appropriate for us to support, to move our zoning in a direction to support more residential development. We need more housing. And this zoning change will facilitate potential projects that include more units, which we desperately need. So I encourage colleagues to vote yes on this item. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Marchand. Is there further discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstaining? Okay, the item passes to the full board as a favorable recommendation. Alderman Marchand.
Mr. Chair, I move item 2.
Been moved and seconded. We will have discussion. Any discussion? Alderman Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is the ADU item. I think there's much here that recommends us giving a favorable recommendation. However, I'm not certain that it's ready for prime time. I wanted to make the motion, Mr. Chair, because I wanted to be able to speak on it, not because I am urging us to rush out and pass it this evening. In particular, I think there are multiple pieces of the puzzle that we discussed this evening in connection with this item. Certainly enforcement, the zoning, and the financing. And we've heard the discussion on enforcement. We know that the enforcement issue is before us in the form of our budget proposal for the next fiscal year. So we know that's another place where that discussion is happening. We're not quite ready to hear, or the staff's not quite ready to say more about what financing support could be. That's an important piece that I would like to understand before taking action on this item. And then finally, I feel that we actually need to address the issue of and I worry about acting on this ordinance amendment before we have, at least in the pipeline, not on the motion and being passed, an ordinance amendment that creates some sensible regulation short-term. Because the fear I have, and perhaps it's unfounded, but I have it nonetheless, is that should we pass this ordinance, we'll see a number of concerns and individuals developing ADUs in order to get most money out of the county. And there's a reason to that, because it's not inexpensive to develop ADUs.
And do we want to create a possibility that we'll just see a lot of ADUs being developed for, to be served as cash cow? And that's what short-term rentals could be. Would it not end up being what we hope for it to be? Are places where people can live, family members, neighbors, others, and not just become a way for people to get greater income houses and do it in a way that doesn't provide permanent domiciles for people. So I wanted to see those citations as well, because I'd like to read this for myself. I'm certain that that young man was telling the truth, but I'd like to trust but verify citations. So for me, I would like to see more discussion and progress on those other before we actually enact the amendment. So I'm encouraging us to take a little bit more time. Thank you so much.
Discussion.
Mr. Chair?
Alderman Rodriguez.
Yes. As of 2024, we have about approximately 144,000 people in New Haven. And I'm concerned about the enforcement piece, precisely because we only have issues regarding enforcement. I understand we're trying to find and give a way to effectively enforce it in our city. That is an issue. And I'm also concerned about location. I'm concerned about location because of issues, other issues that many of our colleagues have discussed, including parking and the relationships of neighbors and so forth. Also density, rental cost. We care about housing, right? But we want affordable housing because we're going to have housing. People are going to come to live to New Haven. That means more people in New Haven. But what about the people that we have here that we want to be to some of these use because they will not be? Because as we have discussed here, what I've discussed, landlords are going to want to be able to obtain monies for their investments. Most important, I think that we definitely need to look at that we need to address the housing problem as a whole and look at the ordinances that we have. We have good ordinances in the books, but we need to enforce them, these issues.
Thank you. Well, I share some of the same concerns, and just to add on about green space. And I think we are possibly going through a reorganization for LCI. I would like to see how that pans out before we set this ordinance in effect, because it's definitely going to have enforcement and where that may fall. And what I would like to do, like for us to do, is I'm going to recommend to our president that we form a working group to discuss more of the plan, some of these questions, so that we can really hash it out. We've had 2 committee meetings on this, and City Plan Director Brown and the other, and Mr. Piscatelli did an excellent job in presenting. But I feel that even as we were working in the beginning, it started with the rookie. And so this is a major change away from what we had originally set. And so I would like to see alders back and that kind of thing to work out some of these details that I think are very important. Because we need to get this right. And there is a cry for affordable housing, but I think that if we just pump the brakes a little bit on this, I don't think there's going to be a line standing on the door to do ADUs tomorrow. But I do see the urgency in getting more housing built. And so I don't think this is something that we should take or put on our back burner, but just slow the process down so we can really understand what it is and how this is going to affect our city. I really want to see the streets, the places that are applicable to this, the locations. And I may drive down each street and just take a look and see what that would look like. So that I can have a good understanding of what this is. And so I would like to see us slow down a little bit. I'll request a working group based on how this moved. How this moves forward tonight, and that's my 2 cents. Any other discussion?
Mr. Chair, let me just share one more.
Certainly.
Thank you. In reference to enforcement, we heard here some information. Well, what about really doing enforcement in the sense of, we say, oh, there really isn't people that are interested, so we're not going to see a movement toward this once we establish it. But how do we evaluate enforcement? That we really are applying enforcement that's in the best interest of the things that we are doing. That's a very important thing. Mr. Shively mentioned, and Mr. Tracton about the issue of illegal units and all of the cases that are coming before him. And it's quite obvious that we have people that are living in spaces that have people, and for this reason, we may want to pursue this. And the work that our departments have done regarding housing and this idea is a very good idea. But I agree that a work group would help us maybe really look at this and look at how we're going to do it in New Haven. Thank you.
Thank you, Rodriguez. Alder Shannon.
In consideration of a number of maybe take more time on this, I withdraw my motion.
Thank you, Alder Shannon. Is there a further motion?
Mr. Chair, I move item 3.
Second.
3 has been moved and seconded. This is the request for an exception to the city charter requirement concerning administrative officer. Discussion. Alder Morrison.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in support of this, you said it's not a waiver, it's an exception. As the ordinance allows, there is a hardship. And Mrs. Kittle has definitely demonstrated the try to maintain to maintain a home here in New Haven, which you know is not cheap, and a home in Rocky Hill, and she's married. And because she wants to serve and she wanted to come to New Haven and provide service and utilize her skill sets in our community. But, we think things initially, but then when you're in them, then you realize, you start to really see what's important. And as important as the job is, family is most important. And to, as testified here today, if you will leave at 8:1 to get to City Hall, that's gonna take at least 30 minutes, right? Same thing, it would take 30 minutes. So to lose a great staff person just because she wants to be able to be with her family at night, I don't think that's a good way to handle business when we know we have someone that's very dedicated to our city, and not just by words, but through action. And as testified tonight,
she has definitely shown to be a person that whatever the situation is going to support you. That she would do. And when you get someone like that, Jim, you have to realize what diamond that we have, not allow it to go just because we have a rule that says we can't go outside of four corners of the city. So I support this exception. She's definitely, she falls within all the realms of what has been outlined in our ordinance around this topic. So yeah, that's all I need to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. For the discussion.
Yes.
Alder Rodriguez, and then Alder.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was in the Aldermanic Affairs Committee and we found Ms. Rush, the post of administrative officer. And in the work that we did through that committee, we reviewed her life experience and the things that she has accomplished working with the state and also in her military service. We learned a great deal of important things that we expose. There's definite evidence here of her hardship. But I'd like to reference two letters. A letter by Sean Madison, Chief of Staff, and a letter by Susan Baldwin, Personnel Director. And I'd like to reference the fourth paragraph toward the end of Ms. Baldwin's letter, where she refers and she indicates beyond her responsibilities, such as serving as the acting police chief, leading human service resources, and overseeing emergency management. This is very significant. And why? Because can she address emergencies immediately? She has demonstrated in her work and my personal experience during these times when we were addressing the issue, acting chief, the issue of the emergency management when our emergency director had to leave. She took on this role and she immediately went into action, which leads me to understand that in her military work and her experience with, I believe, they are taught to act immediately in crises. She is definitely really a hat to us acting as a stellar in this work. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for giving me this opportunity.
Thank you, Alder Rodriguez. Alder Rodriguez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I echo what Alder Rodriguez and Morrison said. I would add that in this time of hardship, our CAO has under her belt several departments. She has stepped that keeps us all up to date, and I don't think that her work will change moving forward. I think this would enhance her even more, having the energy, being around her family, and also coming back to her New family. So I hope you support. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alder. I do, before I ask for further comment, I want to redirect, because I think we're getting off what this is about. This is not relevant to her job performance. And we really, this is a new ordinance. And we really need to stay away from job performance because that's up for the administration to decide whether or not she's working or this ordinance we're covering that's working in the department. I would hope that if they weren't doing what they're supposed to do, then this would be granted, but they wouldn't send this to us. What this is about is whether or not Ms. Rush Kittle meets the requirements for getting a exception to the elector and residency requirement based on hardship. And so we really should be speaking on the information that was given to us and whether we feel as a committee that she meets the standard for hardship to present that to the full board of alders. So that's kind of one, and we have heard some of that in all of your testimonies, but I want to just kind of redirect that because this is the first time that we're hearing this for this ordinance. And if we start talking about job performance, that's not what this ordinance is for. So that's kind of want to redirect that, and now I will open the floor again for further comments if any colleagues would like. Alder Saban.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I would just say I do think that that the situation meets the requirement for hardship that we laid out in the ordinance. I think we created this ordinance to make sure there was an opportunity to create an exception if there was somebody who faced particular challenges, make it difficult for them to continue doing their job. And I think that the commute from her family is that issue that meets that requirement, and as well as the emotional distress of being with your family. I think that meets, in my mind, the criteria for hardship on the ordinance.
Thank you, Alder Saban. Any further discussion? Alder?
Mr. Chair, yes. In circumstances regarding 30 miles in terms of employment, getting enrollment and the post that is so significant that Mr. Rush would have, we could say that that should not be, that is, while that's significant, would that affect the work in our city? And it could affect. And many people would say, well, that's really not something that we should consider. But because anyone can have that same condition or concern. But I think what would make the difference is that she has demonstrated to address crisis, and that in her expertise and skills, that she would be able to still meet the demands of a crisis, should a crisis exist in our city and need her. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Rodriguez. Was there anyone else who would like to testify? Alder Morrison.
I just wanted to be clear, just to go back, since you kind of redirected us, Mr. Chair. She does, in my opinion, Mrs. Rush Kittle definitely meets the hardship, because I don't know too many people who can pay 2 mortgages. That's a financial hardship. And I don't know too many people who are married that can just stay away from their spouse. And so those 2 pieces, in my opinion, puts her in a situation where she does meet that hardship, because financially she is being tugged at, and then emotionally she's being tugged at because she can't be with her husband as in, I don't want to use the word normal because I don't know what it is anymore, but wholesome, I guess, marriage, healthy marriage where people come together to be as one. And it's hard to be as one when you're apart. So that's why I say that she, in my opinion, she meets this hardship. So.
Thank you, Alder Morrison. Let me just read a little before we go. So we have this is the ordinance establishing an exception to the electoral requirement of charter and city residency for the incumbent coordinators. As Ms. Reagan stated, this is directly addressed for Mrs. Regina Bush Kittle. So I'm not going to read this whole thing because it's a little lengthy, but just a little bit for us to consider when we get down to the to our vote. And I appreciate what Alder Rodriguez said in your final statement and what President Pro Tem, so you said I'm using President Pro Tem, has said in her final statement. So the intent is to establish criteria for an exception to the electoral default standard in order to permit the personnel director to make a recommendation subject to sign off by the mayor and approved by the majority vote of the members of the board of alder's and voting. So this ordinance is designed to establish a standard of necessity and not convenience. So let me just go down to factors for consideration. Among the factors to be considered by the personnel director are: one, economic hardship, saw here, including consideration of the cost of residency, including the potential for economic loss associated with the sale of the residence home prior to appointment and purchase of a replacement residence, the cost of maintaining multiple residences for the purpose of complying with the requirements of the charter. I'm going to take a pause because you're talking about a person who's coming forward today, not a person by her name, and she did state that when she was going to come to New Haven, she would get residency here, which she has. Two, the presence of school-age children in a household. Three, necessity of a member of a coordinator's household to continue to reside in the residence owned prior to appointment. Four, health-related or medical reasons. And or five, any other factor that creates a substantial hardship for the coordinator. And then it goes on to the other things that are more for the administration to review. So these are things that we're considering tonight, based on these 5 reasons. And it is my interpretation that the applicant must meet at least one of these items, one of these. And so we did hear, and my only concern, which is why I questioned it, my only concern is the emotional distress, because of that broad range of what that could be. And so I would push back a little on emotional distress. And I would stick with one of these 5 that are here, which Ms. Rush-Cato does meet, which is the financial hardship. And so in my final comment, I would say that I do support this application for the exception based on her financial hardship. Is there any other discussion? And let me just say, I'm concerned about us opening up emotional distress. That's not something that is here under these reasons, though can emotional distress be health related or medical reasons? If that's true, then I would prefer that word, health related or medical reasons, as part of, because emotional distress could be, I'm being distressed by sitting here this long talking about this. And so, I'm not being funny, but that could be so any coordinator can say, I'm stressed out by moving here, and I need to go move in another city.
Mr. Chairman.
And so if I'm going to go to Alder Marchand, and then I'll go back to Alder Rodriguez. And I appreciate this discussion because this is the first time that we're doing this. And I think what we're doing is really setting the precedent for how this ordinance will be moving forward. Thank you. Alder Marchand.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So clearly, factor number 1 has been cited in this application. I think probably item number 3 is implicit, but it is not explicitly stated or justified, which is the necessity of a member of the coordinator's household to continue to reside in the residence owned prior to appointment. Clearly, her husband still lives in Rocky Hill. There was nothing in the application saying why it was necessary for her spouse to live in. If it were more clearly stated, perhaps we would say that it could be granted under that as well. But the fact that factors in there, the necessity of a member of the household to stay in the prior residence, does seem to acknowledge that keeping the family together is desirable aim and has some amount of recognition in that exception process. So I would say that number one is clearly, there's a case made for that. Number three, indirectly, implicitly perhaps referenced, although not explicitly referenced. You could potentially say, one might potentially say that item 5, which is kind of a catch-all item, says any other factor that creates a substantial hardship for the coordinator. You might say emotional distress that they having to fall underneath that. But I would say that it would behoove the administration in the future to move very closely to these factors. I understand. If we, in particular, if in number 5, if we start to give examples that, if we fill that up with lots of different things, then it begins to undermine the need to have a residency requirement of this person. So for me, I think it is good for us, when we vote on this, to cite the factor that we think is met. And probably that would just be number 1, because it's clear, and not start to enlarge it by adding other things into number 5 that would be present, could be seen as precedential, and give a wider range of reasons why someone might be a good person to get this exception. Having said all that, I'm in favor of granting the exception based exclusively on that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Shannon. Alderman Rodriguez.
Yes, no, I just wanted to surface that again in the application. There was no mention regarding illness on the part of the spouse. There was nothing in the application, so that's something that else that we could have considered, but that was never surfaced. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Alderman Rodriguez. Any further? So before we call the vote, we appreciate the work that Ms. Kittle has done. We don't want to, even though we're considering the reason why we don't want to remove a person. But at the same time, we understand we're not voting on this because of her person, but because of the hardship that the person has incurred. All in favor of giving this a favorable recommendation to the board, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstaining? The ayes have it.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Second, discussion on adjourning this meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Any abstaining? No adjourn. Thank you, colleagues. Mr. Chair. Thank you, Ms. for
Thank you.
What do you consider? Sharper, yes. Does this they submitted? Everything?